Welcome. Good afternoon, everybody. Morgan and I are here today doing the keynote.
Yeah, unfortunately, Lord Story of Charlwall couldn't make it today because he had business in the House of Lords, but he's rearranged, I think, for the 21st of March. So that's quite good that he's rearranged. But we had to step in because it was all a bit last minute. So we don't really regard ourselves as keynote speakers. We're just the kind of B team, you know. So we brought up the text wall so you can remind you of the number. Remember, start a text with hope. There's a number up there, and you can put your messages in. And we've got a little presentation to run through today, which is partly about education in general, partly about the course, partly about something very specific on the course.
Yeah, and actually the fact that Lord Story's not here and we're here instead provides us with an excellent opportunity to revisit some we think quite significant points about this course, what we're trying to do and where we're going to be going for the rest of it. You're sort of just over halfway through the year now, and so it's downhill all the way. I mean,
in the best possible way.
In the best possible sense, downhill. So that's the idea that we can revisit some of the things that maybe we said at the start of the year and maybe clarify some questions that you have. Sometimes you might be thinking, well, what's all this about? Yeah. What are the 4 disciplines of education all about anyway? When you come to a course like this, we present you with 4 disciplines of education, and that's decided, if you like, for you. You don't get to choose which 4 disciplines you study. You don't get to determine why you're studying those particular disciplines in great detail, although we try to give you an insight to that straight away. So that's what we want to do, is just kind of say something about why we're doing this, what we're trying to do, and the context of what we're trying to do. The context for you, go on to the next slide, maybe the first context, and chip in Morgan, is for you, or conscious in your minds, is imaged here in the top right, the fact that you are all paying vast sums of money to be here right now. And that's obviously going to affect your experience, and it's obviously affecting the sector of higher education quite dramatically. It's affecting everybody's experience of university. And it's a big question for us, and for you, and for culture and society as a whole: who pays for education and who should pay for it? So that's one big change.
If I can just jump in there, and I like the placard that you can see in the top left that says "definitely shite." But this issue of tuition fees, it isn't restricted to higher education, because a lot of the schools that we went to, or the schools that we've taught in the past, one of the ways in which they see themselves as being successful is in terms of the numbers of people that they get going into universities, and that's been the way maybe for the last couple of decades or so. It's impossible. So possibly secondary schools are going to have to rethink what their mission is. Is it just their job to try and get as many young people as possible out their doors at the end of 6 years schooling or something like that, and then into a higher education institution? Certainly, schools that regard themselves as prestigious and high status, that's what they've seen themselves as being about. And I think a lot of the staff within those schools are maybe feeling uncomfortable for a few years, and certainly now, about what they're sending their students on to do. Is it a responsible thing for us to be endlessly trying to expand the higher education sector? Is the quality of the good within that higher education sector up to people's expectations? Does it do what it's meant to do on the tin, I think, is the Ronseal expression, isn't it? Schools Direct, Dave's got a picture of this on the top left. This is the idea that many teachers in future will be trained not through universities but directly in schools. So the idea that teaching is a practical skill. It's artisanal, you might say, like a craftsman or craftsperson, something like that, and therefore it's something that's best learned on the job, without the airy-fairy, waffly old theoretical background context, which I assume that many of you in the room will probably think, yeah, that's what we think. Why do we have to do all this airy-fairy stuff? And people like me and Dave think that the theoretical stuff is really important and interesting, and yet we find ourselves fighting for a voice in the face of big policy changes.
Yeah, because the government, of course, are basically saying that if you're going to go on to teacher training, get rid of all this Plato, all this Bourdieu. We don't have time for that. What we need is literacy and numeracy, and that's what we're concerned
And
about.
people that can do classroom management, you know, that kind of
Yeah, the
stuff.
techniques for managing classes, that's what people need to know. If you do a PGC today, or if you go to QTS today, a large part of your studies will be about those management skills, those practical skills you need for the classroom. And neither of us, no one, would deny the relevance of those skills, but the question remains is if we only learn those skills, are we just reproducing some of the problems, the social problems that still exist in our societies today?
So for instance, if you think back to an earlier section of the course on sociology, and we have the idea there within the sociology element of the course that schools really reproduce their local environment. So what you get is working class kids going to working class schools and coming out and having a working class life afterwards. The language is a bit 1970s-ish, but if teaching is just all about technique, then what you've got is a situation where people are being managed. And Dave and I, with our philosopher hats on, we want to say that doesn't really treat the people within education as fully formed persons. Instead, it treats them as things in some way to be managed, which is something that we would worry about. I think the bottom photograph, Dave, correct me if I'm wrong, is this an illustration of knowledge in thin air, or
this is the economic crisis that has been used by governments to I mean, I don't know who came up with this, but never waste a good crisis. That was some wise word from a politician. And what they meant was, when a crisis like this comes along, make sure you use it to your advantage. And I think the government is able to use the present economic crisis to its own advantage to direct teacher education and education studies in a particular direction, away from liberal thinking and towards more technocratic control forms of thinking. So social control is the aim of the government, and it uses the economic crisis as a pretext for more social control. And so that's what teacher education is becoming. And that's
a bit like a more subtle version of Fahrenheit 451, if you remember that movie that I put you through way back earlier in the course.
Yeah. So all those aspects of change characterise where we are today, and indeed no one quite knows what the government's going to come up with next, and it's a real changing picture, and that's really important to bear in mind.
Yeah. Okay, so. We're trying to maintain that education, in some way, is about transformation. So it might be about transforming people's horizons, going from a narrower set of horizons to a broader one. You might be interested in economic transformation, going from a situation of not being very well off to a situation where you can command a much higher wage within the labour market. Other people might say it's about social transformation. So, I don't know, Marxists might want to ferment revolutionary fervour within education or something like that.
Or you just want to meet your mates. You get in a good group of mates in uni. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The psychological aspect of transformation. Somebody like help me out, Dave. What could we say here?
Psychological transformation. Well. Okay, so I think psychological transformation, spiritual transformation, when I put these slides together, I thought of those, and all of them in fact, as directed towards liberation, freedom. And that's the question that we asked you. The essay, you'll remember, was about to what extent does education bring about freedom, liberation? Now, economic liberation means you've got more economic power, you can choose the kind of career you want to have rather than being forced into working in a factory, as your grandparents perhaps would have experienced. Social freedom, you're no longer stuck in the peer group that you grew up with perhaps. So some people who started off life in a very working class environment might, if they want to, be socially mobile and might become, yuppies or something like that. You don't know that phrase, yuppies. But they might go and work in the city. But psychological and spiritual transformation and freedom is more radical, at least in my view, and it's about not being confined by cultural, social and psychological
norms?
Forces. Like, I'll give you my example, is my dad. I still think about what my dad cares about, and my own life is in many ways conditioned by the expectations of my dad. I still have him looking at me and commenting on my own life. And that kind of psychological limitation can be problematic. It can feel like an inhibition on our lives, constantly thinking about what my dad makes of me. Always feeling how I have to kind of compare myself with his life or my brother's life. So is it possible to be truly free, and is education about that? So that's kind of what I was getting at.
Okay, right. I was talking to a student in the third year earlier on today who had previously told me an interesting anecdote about when she applied to come to university, when her dad said to her, mature student, "What are you going to university for? You're thick." We had a laugh about it because it was a few years ago that she was told that, and she's an absolutely brilliant student, and it's just so funny the different generational and class attitudes towards education, and I was making the point that it's likely, I think, that people like your dad's experience of education in turn conditions his attitude towards it, because he didn't find it to be a transformative force or a liberating thing at all. Being told off in a crappy school, maybe in the I don't know when he went to school in the 1950s, and presumably thinks of education as much the same today. And we might have an intent to transform people's lives, but do we pull it off? I would guess that maybe not very often, and does that mean that we fail because we don't pull it off very often? I'm not sure if it's so easy to measure in that way. Anyway, those are the kind of signs that you see around our faculty, aren't they? So this is Bart's language. Education is a deeply human endeavour. I agree with that, but I don't think we do it very successfully every day. In fact, maybe now is a good time to say that in terms of organisation this afternoon, we've got quite a few members of staff off. So just look out for notices on the door and be prepared to be sharing with another group this afternoon.
Right. So should we go on to the
move
next
on.
one? So with all of that, you might appreciate that we don't think of knowledge just in academic terms, just stuff that we transfer to you, like pieces of information. There are a whole different ideas about knowledge, whether it's just academic, whether it's vocational, professional, or whether it's personal. And we do think of knowledge in different ways and different times. And I suppose those types of transformation that we talked about earlier require different forms of knowledge. So, for example, emotional knowledge or something like that, spiritual knowledge in reference to my relationship with my dad. That kind of a reflective awareness of how I am with my parents. I have to learn that slowly, and as I get older, I become more aware of my own reactions to my dad and so on. So there's a constant sort of deeper levels of knowledge coming into play. So we start off thinking of knowledge just as pieces of information, and obviously we're trying to broaden that out in all sorts of ways.
Yeah, this threefold the distinction between different forms of knowledge is quite interesting, and I don't know if the explanation I'm about to give is what's in Dave's mind, but I'm going to try and simplify what I think about these three different forms of knowledge. So academic knowledge might be largely about knowledge that you gain from books, for example, or journal articles, or things that we read about. The third category of personal knowledge you might not tend to get from books. So Dave doesn't understand his relationship with his dad from reading a manual in psychology, although maybe he could try and do that. But presumably that personal knowledge is something that's gained in a very practical way through experience and nuanced interpretation of different relations and expectations in different settings. When we talk about professional knowledge, we often mean something that's highly technical and a set of rules and regulations, the kind of nuts and bolts that maybe, for example, qualifying teachers have to try and pick up in order to gain their qualifications. And it's sometimes useful to separate out these three different forms of knowledge because sometimes they will all clash with each other.
Yeah, and of course the agenda of different companies and agencies and universities will focus on one rather than another. You go to church, perhaps, if you do, for a more personal relationship to knowledge, maybe. University for academic knowledge. on an apprenticeship for more professional knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just conscious of the time, and we want to talk about the poster activity in a minute, so we're going to sort of zip through a little bit more as well through these disciplines.
Okay, yeah. So very, very briefly, we've mentioned endlessly these 4 different disciplines, which were kind of given to us by largely by a philosopher called Richard Peters in the 1960s. There's a quote from him at the bottom, I'll just read it out. Education is not an autonomous discipline, but a field like politics, where the disciplines of history, philosophy, psychology, and sociology have application. So why are we making you look at these 4 different disciplines? Well, we think that there's something healthy about encouraging students to understand things from 4 different perspectives, because true understanding is not going to lie within the sociology of education or in the philosophy of education or history or psychology, but in the gaps in between them. So these 4 different points hold in tension true knowledge somewhere in between, and that's up to you as an individual to decide what your understanding of education is, taking it from 4 different perspectives simultaneously. So this is an attempt to hold different valid forms of knowledge in tension with one another.
Yeah, so these 4 disciplines of education were really established then clearly in the 1960s. They became less fashionable when the government became quite obsessed maybe with more the professional knowledge side for a while, and they're kind of enjoying a bit of a, well, at least in certain places, they're enjoying a bit more interest these days. So people are starting to think again about the disciplines of education, which, as I said, were popular in the 60s.
Yeah, sorry, I should just very briefly give you a little potted history. In the 60s, Peters is commissioned to think about how to rearrange education for teachers, because a lot of teaching in Britain at the time was thought to be rubbish. And so his answer is to try and intellectualize the subject and get people that are able to reflect critically on what education is. That's his answer in the 60s. And as Dave suggested, when politicians get involved in trying to sort education out, which happens in the late 1970s, then this agenda starts to drop away, and we can see even more pressure to push this away in more recent months and years. Okay, so this discipline-based approach goes against the idea of a modular system, because rather than getting gobbets of knowledge, whether academic or practical or professional, from different modules, we're trying to give you the idea that education is a course to be followed from lots of different perspectives, and we want to be critical of that idea that knowledge is just something that's imbibed by the learner and then repeated. We want people that are thinking critically about things through, as we describe here, active inquiry and willing to challenge authority, including the authority of people like me and Dave.
Yeah, and we've wanted to establish a core of education studies, the core of education studies. Now, it may be open to question. Some of you may be really interested in politics and want to bring that in. But the way we've structured those 4 disciplines has tried to establish the core of education studies, that anybody who knows anything about education should have that core. And that's why it's not modular. Modular would be where you get a bit of this, a bit of that. No, we've looked at it as a whole, a core.
Okay, why do we do that? Because we think this encourages a non-instrumentalist attitude in students, or we hope it does.
And what does that mean, a non-instrumentalist attitude?
Well, Dave, if you're instrumental about something, then you regard it as a tool. So getting qualifications will be a tool for getting something else, like a job. And we don't think that it's not important that you get jobs. We really want you to be able to get jobs at the end of your period of education. But we also think that education is not training. It's not just about doing something else. It's valuable in its own right.
And in fact, the culture of change that we are witnessing means that the world is going to be different in 10 years, and the kinds of training you would receive, the kinds of curriculum knowledge you would receive will be irrelevant perhaps in 10 years' time anyway. So the whole point of the liberal curriculum is to give you a kind of deep knowledge that can be applied across the board. In fact, it should make you more employable, it should make you more valuable to society, and in a sense even more instrumental, although that's not the word
not the way to look at it. Yeah. Sorry, yeah. No, I was just agreeing with you there. Okay, so this is an overview of the curriculum. I'm going to whip through this because we've seen it before. So year 1, year 2, year 3 is how it sets itself out. I've introduced this triangle to you in the past before, where we think that people like Dave engages with the students and some issue that they're looking at, and this leads to a transformation in values. The reason I bore you with that diagram again is because we could maybe think about the activity that we've got planned for you in the workshops to make an academic poster in these terms. So your workshop tutor will engage with you over some aspect of education, and you'll be working in groups normally of 4 when you're doing this. So as you begin thinking about your poster, you'll have some kind of pre-reflective understanding of what the issue is that you've decided to investigate. You'll conduct some research, you'll reflect on that research, you'll talk about it in your group, and that hopefully will give you an enlarged perspective on the issue, which you can then write up on the poster.
Yeah, because what could happen is you could say, right, so you get your poster, you've got to do a poster, right? So you think, I'm really interested in, I don't know, sexual education to 14-year-olds. So that's what we're going to look at. We look at that. Oh, this is what happened to me in my class when I was 14. Let's put that on our poster. Let's find a couple of references. Bish, bash, bosh. Nice colours. Brilliant. Done. Now, the trouble with that, of course, is that there would be no moment, no cycle of investigation, no breakdown of your current understanding.
No transformation, basically.
No transformation. So the whole point is that you have your idea of what sexual education was when you started out, say. You go through a period of research which will hopefully challenge some of those initial impressions. So you'll come up with a new form, a developed form of what you're talking about. This is just a simple idea of a process of research. Hopefully that will change your views and create an enlarged perspective.
And it's not just the research that you do, but also talking to each other in your groups and in your tutor groups as well, workshop groups, will help to give you that enlarged perspective.
So what is an academic poster? You've all got posters. I've got this one. I love a bit of Nicki Minaj. Is that how you say it?
I don't know, Dave.
How do you say it? Is it Nicki Minaj? Yeah, thank you. I've got all her albums. Now, there's a poster. Obviously not an academic poster, so that's not the kind of poster we're talking about.
Yeah, so the poster is more than just a graphic representation of something that looks attractive, like Nicki. It's more than this as well. So we've got a kind of poster you might see on a classroom wall or something, which is slightly more academic than the previous poster, because at least there's some kind of questioning on there, some kind of theorizing on there, but it's still not exactly what we've got in mind. This is much more like an academic poster, but it's also over the top. In academic conferences over the course of the last 10 years or so, and I think it's a tradition that comes from science conferences, if you're not prestigious enough to get on the main billing for an academic conference, there tends to be a group of sad individuals that kind of hang around in the lobby next to their posters, advertising what their research is about, standing next to it, so that you as a conference delegate can go up to them, have a look at that poster, and then question them later on about the research that they're doing. And this is obviously the kind of thing that's going on here in a very professional poster, which goes into a whole lot of detail about temporal order judgment. I've no idea what that is, Dave.
Can I just... Because I think, Morgan, have you ever presented an academic poster at a conference?
I haven't, no.
Well, I have, and indeed I was rejected from the main proceedings of the conference, and so I ended up one of those sad individuals creating a poster, standing there with cards and flyers. Talk to me about my ideas. That was one of the darker days of my academic career. But
worse than today.
Well, no, obviously not. But so. An academic poster is supposed to be a crystallisation, almost like of an essay, of a key thesis, idea, argument, in a visual way. Obviously, there's plenty of words. This is a better example, isn't it?
Yeah. So here's a really nice, clear one, I think, that we've got on the PowerPoint here. So Islamic feminism and its role in cinema, by Sabina Shah, a PhD or MPhil drama candidate, and she talks about the background to the research, what her objects are, and looking at Muslim women's gender roles, breaking the shackles of suppressed Muslim women's stereotypes and so forth, and so advocating a feminist agenda. She talks about her methods, she talks about her results. It's nicely illustrated with a couple of nice pictures and offers some conclusions, and importantly, because it's an academic piece of work, there's a list of references on there, and then there's her email address if we want to get in touch with her if her work is of interest to us.
Now, obviously, this particular poster is not in the field of education studies. It's in the feminism, Islam, and cinema, interdisciplinary. Posters often are interdisciplinary. Now, we're going to look at an example from education studies. This is from last year. So this is an example of what students produced last year for their academic posters. During the workshop session, you will see a couple more examples, just to give you a bit more of an idea. But you could Google academic posters, and you'd see lots of different examples, and you get some sense of what they're about if you do that. So in this case, again, we've got a fairly substantial amount of information. We've got our references at the bottom. We've got structured into different areas. I don't know if you want to comment on it at all.
Not really. There's just the idea that it's structured into different areas in quite a nice way. So there's a kind of definitional area up here, and it compares Piaget with Vygotsky, a couple of psychologists that might be interested in the role of play in learning and so forth. So a bit of background there, and then we've got a bit on child development here and how children develop. We've got 3 different questions that are addressed here, and then a fairly substantial list of references at the bottom. So I would say that was a pretty good poster. I've no idea what mark it got, Dave, last year, but
it failed.
Did it?
No.
That looks pretty good.
So what you're going to notice about the group work, how many of you have had to do group work before? Just a few of you. Come on, show of hands. How many of you done group? And most of you have done group work before. Anyone want to share with us the main challenge of group work?
Dr. Lewin, I find some of my colleagues when I'm doing group work to be very, very unhelpful and unreliable.
Some people just aren't very helpful and reliable. In that case, like Alan Sugar, you say you're a lightweight, you're fired. No, you don't do that. In group work, you have to get on with people, and that's just part of the challenge. So you're going to be working in a group, in a team, and some people are going to be up for it and really go for it, and some people are maybe going to drag their heels. That's part of the assessment, that's part of the process.
Yeah, one of the learning objectives on our course is to encourage students to learn to work well in groups. So it's a deliberate thing. I know it's going to be something that irritates some of you, but it's also important because one of the facts of life is that when we do go to work, you do have to work with unreliable people, that don't show up. Like Lord Story, for example, you have to fill in at the last minute for cover their lectures. And so this kind of cooperative working is absolutely essential in the modern era. It's not the case that you can just wander off into the fields and till the land on your own these days. We have to get along with each other, and that means acquiring important skills sometimes. Like, for example, the ability to be firm with other people, or to compromise with other people. And if we don't practice this, then it's hard to learn.
Yeah, and of course, don't forget, obviously, that puts a responsibility on everybody as much as a challenge. There's a responsibility on all of you to be supportive of your group. Having said all of that, there will be an opportunity for you to comment on each other's performance and contribution to the poster, because it is an assessed piece of work. So if someone literally has done nothing and everybody's consistently said that so-and-so's done nothing, then we will look at that and we will adjust the marks in a case-by-case basis. We don't want to do that. We want to seek to avoid to do that, but we will do that if necessary.
Yeah, we've got to have a mechanism in place so that the marked assessment is fair, basically.
So tomorrow we're going to go through this in more detail. The Friday workshop is going to be used quite a bit for the poster, so make sure you're there.
Okay.
Yeah. So we've got the text wall. We wanted to, at this stage of the course anyway, have a kind of heads up, or find out if there are any issues, any questions about the course, about the way it's structured, about anything at all that may be general. So you could come to speak to us through the text hall. You could send the text. You could put up your hand. Are there any thoughts? Is there anything on the...
Yeah, there's two questions here. So the first one says, isn't the UK lagging behind in literacy and numeracy in comparison to somewhere like Sweden? Don't we then need more emphasis as well as the airy-fairy stuff? Good question, I think, yeah? Because what this question is pointing up is that some of these technical things that we have to learn about through professional knowledge is really, really important. And we don't mean to denigrate that kind of knowledge. And we think that numeracy and literacy are absolutely fundamentally important to education. But I would also say that if we take literacy as an example, I would say that it's not merely a technical matter. And Dave, I want you to jump in and correct me if I say something you disagree with. But for me, literacy is about getting people to not just to be able to read, but to enjoy reading and get pleasure from it, and thereby expand their horizons through the reading that they do and actually love doing it. So when I talk to my nephew about what books he's been reading lately, he says, "Books are shit," and then he turns back to his iPad. So he can read, but his attitude towards reading is absolutely despicable, and but it's also probably reflective of a lot of people of his age, that are just he just wants to play on whatever he's playing on a tablet or something, or turn on the Xbox. And I worry about him turning into some kind of serial killer later on in life or something, because he doesn't seem to be able to engage with anything apart from a computer game. So that was the kind of thing that I would say to a question like that. So I don't mean to say that literacy is unimportant or numeracy is unimportant, but I also think that just technically learning to do sums or to read is not the end of the matter for me. It's more than that.
Yeah, and in fact, the airy-fairy stuff in many ways, I think is once you, well, for me anyway, when you capture an interest in something like philosophy or whatever it is, sociology, then the literacy comes into its own, because being articulate and passionate about a subject makes you more literate, makes you more articulate. And literacy is about being articulate first and foremost. So, it's not just a technique of, I before E except after C, all these rules that you need to learn. It's also about being committed to what you're saying, which I think is about the passion that literacy is about as well. Yeah. And I think there's a parallel with numeracy, but I'd have to think about that.
Well, I know that some people, really love maths, don't they? And they find maths to be a beautiful thing. They talk about elegant solutions to mathematical problems and so forth. So, presumably, even though I haven't experienced a kind of love for maths myself, there are people that get that sense of enjoyment from it. Okay, we'll come to that last question in a minute about any more assignments. Or should we deal with that very quickly? The last assignment after the poster is to do your exam, basically. So the answer is yes, it's an exam.
And the exam you will get to see pretty much after the poster. We'll give you the exam paper, so you'll be able to prepare your answers. Although you won't be able to take anything into the exam room, you can prepare your answers.
Okay, I love this other question. How do we trust the government to make the right decisions regarding education when the people who are keeping them in power are more often than not from the previous generation that not only agree with the government changes but are more likely to vote? Well, it's a good question. I'm not sure I know the answer to it, but one answer is that I think that it's important. If this is true, the assumption that lies behind this question about previous generations supporting the government changes, then maybe it's more important than ever for a younger generation to become more politically engaged and at least turn out and vote and realise that one of the things that's happening at the minute, I think, could be characterised in terms of what's sometimes technically called intergenerational justice, or intergenerational injustice rather, whereby our parents' generation are the kind of people that left work with final salary pensions. They probably worked all their lives and found it relatively easy to find jobs because of the state of the economy at the time that they were young people and leaving education and so forth. And the world is completely different nowadays. I mean, in the 1990s recession, when I couldn't get a job initially after my degree, it was really a depressing situation to be in.
And isn't there a sense of injustice on your part? Don't you feel a sense of injustice that your parent, not for everybody in the room, but some people, their parents have had it relatively good. They've had capital gain on property. They've had this huge boom in the economy, meaning their houses have doubled in value. They've been able to go on holidays, retire when they're 55, 60 perhaps, or maybe not for everybody. I'm not talking about everybody, but for a lot of people, that's going to have been their parents' experience, but not theirs. And this is this bizarre injustice that's being passed down to you and maybe younger people as well, even more so younger people perhaps.
Yeah. No, you don't take notes into the exam is the answer to that.
You don't take notes in the exam, but you get it all into your head.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, I just wanted to call into question another assumption that's in here. It's not the case that all people from older generations support these government changes and think that raising money should be passed on to future generations and so forth. There are quite a few quite radical retired people in their 60s. One of the sad things about the world we live in today is that a lot of people are quite quiet and remain relatively uncritical, holding on to their jobs so that they can be relatively safe through their careers, but then become more radical when they retire because then they can have a more free democratic voice perhaps. I think that's a sad thing, but it's also true. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Any more questions?
See you at your seminar. So be aware that some might be moving around, but hopefully we'll meet you.
Oh, and there's similar difficulties with tomorrow morning as well in the workshop, so look out for notices on doors as well for tomorrow.